had something that none of the other movements seemed to have. They used to say, for example, that in the conservative Jewish movement, you would have rabbis who went to an Orthodox seminary, came out conservative, and had Reform Jews as congregants. In the modern Orthodox world, there used to be a continuity. There was a sense that the laity, the people in the pews, and the rabbis were sharing the same world. But by the 1980s in the United States, and certainly today, there is a huge gap, or there was a growing gap, between the rabbis and their congregants. The rabbis came from a much more right religious point of view and did not share that outlook. So, whether they were in the pulpits or whether they were in the schoolroom, the rabbis, by and large, came from further to the right. The teachers came from further to the right. While modern Orthodoxy looked and continues to look for a pool of young people who might act as models of the sort of modern Orthodox worldview within the classroom, it's one of the most difficult challenges that they face. Nevertheless, those three factors alone would not have been sufficient, although they were certainly important. The fourth factor came really as a result of all of these others. With the perception that American culture and society had declined and become radicalized. And America is a society that really has become much more polarized and dichotomized. And its liberal element, it's much more liberal now than ever before. On the other hand, in its conservative element, it's much more conservative than ever before. What is gone is the moderate middle. The moderate middle has been shrinking in America, and it's exactly the moderate middle that modern Orthodoxy requires. The moderate middle shrunk. In Orthodoxy, that meant that the people who used to call themselves Orthodox but did very little dropped out, and that left the people who were so-called modern Orthodox, who were used to being in the moderate center. Suddenly, centrism meant either you were liberal, too liberal, or you had to become more conservative. The center was torn against itself. America declining, the Jewish education of children completely under the control of the schools themselves in the Judaica faculty moving further and further to the right, and a fear that, given all this, that when the young people came out, they would go into an American society via the university, which the university was still much more radical and much more liberal than the rest of America. A real fear that this was not going to be possible. It was not going to be possible to guarantee Jewish continuity. In a sort of infamous letter that came out recently in the year 2000 on the internet by two graduate students, one from Harvard, one from MIT, two Orthodox graduate students, talking about the dangers of sending your children to college. Even those who are engaged, as they put it, and I'm paraphrasing here, even those who are engaged in outreach or kiruv, the real problem is that they want to show the rest of the population how much you can be Orthodox and with it, and in trying to do that, they take the step down the slippery slope, and who knows what they will do in order to show how normal they are, in order to bring others in. That is, that the process of reaching out can be dangerous for those who do the reaching out. And so, given all of these situations, American Jewry looked for one more insurance, an inoculation against the virus of American cultural life and American society, and that solution was a year in an Israeli yeshiva or seminary. Now, I don't have to tell an audience here what that means. If you think that the university is an ivory tower, you've never been to an Israeli yeshiva. In an Israeli yeshiva, there are lots of things that are going on when these young people came to these Israeli yeshivas. Number one, there was no pressure of grades. These are young people who had just gone through an intensive period of having huge pressure for grades in order to get into colleges and universities that they had selected. That's gone. Secondly, for many of them, the first time that they've spent an extended period away from their parents, a time when they are in what is essentially a total institution, cut off from their parents, cut off from everything that's familiar with them, sitting in a yeshiva where the key element of that life is sitting side by side, as it were, with your chavruta, with your peers, without the pressure of grades, seeing the rabbis who are your models in the same base medrash with you, living in this kind of environment where the only thing that you have to worry about is making sense of the Talmud or whatever the subject is that you're studying, and being told that now you are doing something that is the most noble and most important and most valuable thing that you have ever done in your life. And of course, what is the goal of Shana Aleph in the yeshiva? Shana Bet. And what is the goal of Shana Bet? Shana Gimel. And ultimately the goal is never to leave the yeshiva, because that's the ideology of yeshiva life in this country. Moreover, the people who head the yeshiva here are much more active in their fundamentalism. They are willing to fight back against society. They are filled with all kinds of messages that if they don't deny the legitimacy of secular Israeli society, it is certainly the case that they say that by going back to America, you have sold out. That feeling is very powerful in the minds of many of these young people who go through the yeshiva. And you can see a transformation that comes over them, because there's also something else. These are adolescents. They're just passing that period of what Eric Erickson called the moratorium, in which they want to separate from their parents. And here's an ideal place. They can separate from their parents. They can do something totally different. And they're being told it's noble what you're doing. This separation, this difference, this being something new is, you're not only going to be paid for this by feeling better in this world, but you're doing God's work. You are going to be, you are on the way to being the complete Jewish human being. You can see that transformation coming over them when they come back to America, usually around Pesach time for the first visit. The first thing they want to show themselves and the rest of the world is how transformed they are. And they do it in a whole variety of ways, whether it's wearing a black hat, or you can even see from the way they pray, you know, the pumping, the back and forth pumping, the tzitzit that are out. You can pick them up, you know exactly what's going to happen. Suddenly, young men and women who have never come to who've never heard Baruch Shamar at the service are there every morning. They're praying much longer than anyone else. They are demonstrating the transformation through which they've gone. And when they go back, of course, they go back to the yeshiva afterwards, and they're told in the yeshiva, you really don't want to go back, and they don't want to go back, because this is a wonderful life that they have. They have no worries. They have absolutely no worries. The only thing they have to worry about is preparing for the shiur. And even there, nobody's really going to test them. They have absolutely no worries. Their finances are taken care of. They don't have to work on grades. There's no benchmarks that they have to follow. The only thing they have to do is go through this personal transformation, which they're ready to do. So Shana Aleph leads to Shana Bet, whatever else it leads to. And finally, when they come back to America with a feeling of guilt. A guilt that they have abandoned what they have learned was the noble way, which their parents, of course, told them was the noble way too, because why else would they have sent them? And now, in order to demonstrate that they have not sold out to themselves, they have to bring the yeshiva with them. They have to take all of the things that they have learned, and there's that basis that worked there before, and become even more haredized, as it were, than they were when they left. So in some ways, when they come back to American society, the emphasis now is not the modern Orthodox idea of standing in both worlds, but rather creating a bubble in the American world so that you can get through it without being harmed. So if you go to the university, you spend your time in the Beis Medrash when you're not in classes. You live only within a ghettoized community of others who share these experiences. Your purpose in going to the university is not to enlarge yourself, but to get through it as quickly as possible. And often it is to come back, to recapture this wonderful life that you've had here. Now there is an irony in some of this, and you can see the irony or the paradox if you go, for example, to the streets around the Mir Yeshiva here in Beit Yisrael, Me'ashron Beit Yisrael. Because you can see the double nature of these people. On the one hand, for the Haredim here in Yerushalayim, these young men and women, but let's talk near, we're talking about young men, they are a real problem for them. As they say here, lo yicholim le'achol otam, because they see them as bringing elements of the modern world, modern America with them. They talk to girls, they've been to movies, they carry their culture with them, and even though they look like they have become Haredized, the Haredim know that contact with them is very dangerous. So for the Haredim here, these very young men who've gone through this transformation aren't transformed enough, and they're very much afraid that they are going to be a corrosive, defiling influence for the Haredi world here. Paradoxically, these same young men, when they go back to America, in their communities, they're looked at as a very dangerous element in the sense that they're bringing the Haredi world from Israel back to America, that they're going to transform the communities in which they exist. And indeed, they do transform those communities. As they have come of age, they demand much more in the way of a kind of worldview that they have acquired over the years, both through the Judaica training that they had in the day school Kum Yeshiva in America, and certainly with what they acquired here in Israel. The result of this is that slowly but surely, the modern Orthodox world has retreated from its notion of stabilized dualism. America isn't stable enough for them to keep a foot in it anyway. They don't have Judaica teachers that communicate this view. They have an increasing number of post-Israel graduates, both men and women, who look at the genuine Orthodoxy through the prism of their experience here and can't imagine that American Orthodoxy by itself could exist without the input of here. They've gone through this experience. Israel, the Israeli yeshiva, is very much alive there. It's so much so that I would say one of the perks today, if you're a Ram in a yeshiva in Israel, is you're going to get a trip back to America when one of your students gets married, because you're going to be the Masader Kedusha, because no rabbi in America is going to be good enough compared to what you had here. So you have this kind of slow, gradual, but inevitable movement to the right, a kind of failure of nerve in modern Orthodoxy. The numbers don't yet show it. However, the center of gravity, the feeling of who really determines the character and nature of Orthodoxy, has moved. There are very few organizations and individuals today who can proudly and aggressively stand for modern Orthodoxy. Maybe the point at which I'll end is there is an organization, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with, of modern Orthodox Jews in America called EDA. EDA it's an unfortunate name, and the Haredim have jumped on the name EDA because Maha EDA Hazot. EDA, is Edat Korach. Moreover, what is the motto of EDA? The motto of EDA is the courage to be modern and Orthodox. Today, to be modern Orthodox requires courage. In the past, it seemed like the guarantee, the warranty for movement into America. That's the shift that has occurred. Now, to be modern Orthodox in America requires courage, and there isn't really a powerful pipeline of young men and women going into there in order to sustain it. So, what this portends for the long term, we'll see, but it is fascinating to watch.
Okay, remarks, questions, Ambassador Aaron Lopez.
When we ask questions, if we could use the microphone so
Where's
that
the
the
microphone?
video camera will pick up the questions.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's just
Audio.
It's working, it's working.
Not the video, the audio.
You won't hear it, only he'll hear it.
I was waiting for some good news also, but unfortunately,
Well, it is good news if you're Haredi.
although of course our motto here and everywhere was Ki B'Tzion Tetzeh Torah, but I was always aware of the fact that there was a huge gap between rabbis that have been educated here in Israel and those that have been abroad. Because here, unfortunately, you could see on many occasions rabbis that were narrow-minded, ignorant in many aspects of general education. And if the fact is nowadays that things are getting to the trend that you were pointed to, it is quite worrying about the future.
Well, that's why I call my book The Rise and Fall of Modern Orthodoxy.
Would you, it's just, that's not a question, a clarification. No,
Mike, you're in there for posterity.
you began as an assumption of a benchmark that we all understand called modern orthodoxy. What was modern orthodoxy? I know what it aspires to be. Did it really ever consolidate into the philosophies of those who tried to translate it into derech chaim or orach chaim in the fullest sense? Did it ever really begin and become an institution of American Jewish life beyond the outer visage of it?
That's a very important question, and in a sense, it's a kind of revisionist question. Nobody asked that question in the late 1940s and 50s and early 1960s when modern Orthodoxy was creating a variety of institutions, when there was a cadre of rabbis who shared that point of view, who pointed to, I mean, I could give you a list, I'm sure you're familiar with many of the rabbis who had come from Europe and had a university education and a first-class Jewish education, yeshiva education, who helped in some ways create some of these day schools. There are names that are familiar to all of you, Soloveitchik, Luxstein. I mean, we could go through all of those names, you know them. But they were figures who stood with a foot in each world. In the revisionist view, they really were never that modern Orthodox. I'm not sure that's the case. But one thing is clear, that they were not successful in creating a next generation of rabbis of the same stature who could give modern Orthodoxy the cover that it needed. The late Charles Liebman talked about this long ago. He put it, I think he talked about the lack of gedolim. One of the real problems that modern Orthodoxy has had is that on the one hand it is led by a laity. Its modernity is led by the laity, but always it wanted to be under the cover of the rabbinate. But as the rabbinate became more and more the exclusive domain of right-wing Orthodoxy, it lost its cover and it became forced to do two things, either to be led by the laity or, in a sense, to be led by the community. And one of the characteristics of modern Orthodoxy, and implicit in your question is this has been one of the critiques against it, is that modern Orthodoxy, to be modern Orthodox means to do what other people in the modern Orthodox community do. Not to wait for the rabbi. The rabbi has his own thing, but we do what everyone else does here. That, for a long time, remained normative, but it, under the pressure of right-wing Orthodoxy that was much more totalistic, much more rabbi-oriented, it has been forced to retreat. So, was there ever a modern Orthodoxy? I think there was. I think it ain't dead yet, but it is in critical condition.
Emil Oppenheim, thereafter Chaim Zohar, thereafter
Maybe we
Elizabeth.
should collect a whole bunch of questions and then
Okay, we'll take 3 questions with Amy, Chaim, Elizabeth, and then we have already people for the next round.
Well, I wouldn't say that modern Orthodoxy in itself is on the decline. Due to the post-Iran Israel phenomenon, I would say that the nature of modern Orthodoxy in itself has changed, meaning if you take, the bastion of what we consider modern Orthodoxy, a place like Yeshiva University, whose motto is Torah v'Mad'a, combining, the Bible with science and intellectual studies, instead of, as you said before, having one foot in each door, implying that they're completely separate, what's being done nowadays is trying to combine them. For example, one of the most, prized Yeshiva University trips has been to a tchelet factory to see the chilazon, which modern science claims was the original snail used to find the original tchelet color. So what the trend in modern Orthodoxy now is still being able to have your foot, as you say, in both worlds, but not making them separate worlds, using what you find in one world to bring it back to Judaism and help contribute to the further study and the furthering of Judaism.
To Chaim, and then to Elizabeth, the mic. And then you reply, and then we take the next round of speech.
First of all, to add to what was asked already, you started by defining what fundamentalism is. Can you define to us what modern Orthodoxy is? I know it's more difficult, but you would like to hear. The second point, you didn't mention, and I assume it's purposely, the influence of those figures who came, or rabbis, Talmidei Yeshivot, who came to the state after the Second World War. I think that Aaron Kotler, Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Kamenetsky, Kalmanovich, and others, and their students who came, had an impact, an influence on the haredization of the American Jewish community. You stress the influence of the Chozrim from the studies in Israel. I came to the United States in 1962. At that time, there were not many who studied in Israel before and returned to the United States. And I have the figures because I've dealt with that a few years in my life. In 1968, according to my statistics, there were some 350 overseas students in Israel who studied in yeshivot. The majority of them from the United States, but they were also from other countries, and some of them, maybe 25 or 30%, studied in yeshivot tzioniyot, Kerem Yavne, and so on. But already in 1962, there was this haredization. When I visited, I went to Torah Mesorah. It was the umbrella organization already at that time of the Jewish day schools. It was already under the influence of the Haredim. The director was Dr. Yosef Kamenetsky, a graduate of YU, a former vice president of Pol Mizrahi. But when he spoke about the Gdolim, and Rav Kotler was still, he was just shivering, and everything was what the Gdolim said. So, as I agree with you that there is an influence of those who return, but the process started much before there were some critical mass of them. And I have it from my own experience about the haredization. I invited a granddaughter of one of my friends for Shabbat to our table, and she behaved like we behave. And she studied in one of the institutes, I'm not going to mention the name, not the most extreme one. 2 months later, the grandfather and grandmother came, and I invited them all together. And the grandfather noticed to me, you see, she doesn't sing anymore Shira Ma'alot and Zmirot. It's called B'Yishai Rava in 2 months. And there are many more examples about this. Also, one can mention that modern Orthodox lost some of its leaders who came. You mentioned Charles Heilman, he calls it the brain drain. Some of its leaders made Aliyah to Israel, and that weakened the modern Orthodoxy in the United States. And another point of information, I'm involved in an organization which establishes Kolelim Tzioniyim in the United States. And we have already some 20 communities all over the United States where we have Kolelim Tzioniyim, where the Rosh Yeshiva, the Avrechim, are Bogrei Tzava, and the Bachurim are Shana Dalet Hey, mostly of them. It's a beginning, but within 3 or 4 years we have succeeded to build 20, about 20 such kolelim. That's some achievement. I hope it will have some impact on the community. Toda rabah.
Elizabeth?
First of all, thank you. I think in the invitation to this, we were talking about the pull of modern orthodoxy by the left and the right. And something that I just want to bring up to maybe discuss is what we're trying to save within modern orthodoxy, and what modern orthodoxy and the trying to find this definition of what we're trying to find and how we define it, and is debatable in many ways. And I'm not even asking for a definition. Everyone can have their own definition. But what exactly we're trying to save, and what it was, and what we're trying to maintain. We want modern orthodoxy to stay the same as it was in the 1950s, because we're now in 2004, and maybe that's not what we need in today's society. Is it bad that there are people that are more Torah observant? And is it bad that people within modern orthodoxy are also trying to change and evolve modern orthodoxy to be something different than it was in the 1950s? And I think sometimes, and I hear this often, the same people that are upset that modern orthodoxy has become more haredi are also upset at women's prayer groups and women's tefillah and other steps in modern orthodoxy to make modern orthodoxy, while within the confines of halacha, also push barriers that haven't been pushed in the past. And I think, I don't remember, maybe it was Chaim who said this, that what's the good news? And I think that there's another chapter that hasn't been discussed yet, and that is the chapter of Edah and Chovevei Torah, and institutions like Rabbi
Jofa.
and Jofa, institutions that are very strong in Jewish communities in America right now, and certainly in the New York community, that are powerful communities and powerful institutions of change. Whether Edah produces right now is sending out is training, following the model of Teach for America, to train young Jewish educators that have gone through Harvard and Princeton and Columbia, and sending these young leaders that have gone through Jewish day schools as well to go and teach in under-resourced, meaning, and how I define under-resourced, I don't mean by money, but under-resourced in terms of their staff of being modern Orthodox, to send these modern Orthodox teachers after training to go and teach in Jewish day schools and high schools across America, to increase a modern Orthodox influence of role models that have gone through the day school, gone through the yeshiva, and gone through these popular and elite universities. So creating change in that way. Torah Mitzion, sending out these kolelniks to go and have affected change. Being a Jew that's lived in Los Angeles, and being a Jew that's lived in New York and been part of the modern Orthodox community and gone to Edah conferences and Jofa conferences and dated leaders of modern Orthodox Jewish communities, and being part of the modern Orthodox Jewish community, I see a strong